Yeah.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. We're sorry we're a few minutes late. We were trying to fit all three of us on one screen, but we realized we couldn't pull it off. Actually, we're having some technical difficulties, so Ann and I are sharing this room together. So we're glad you're here tonight. This is not going to be a terribly long session. We just wanted to take the opportunity to introduce ourselves, share a little bit about what you may want to think about this summer, and then also give you a preview about how the process will kick off officially next fall. So I thought we'd start with quick introductions. I'm Jason Hansel. I'm here at St. Andrews for my 7th year, just finishing up my 7th year. And I worked on the college admissions side from 1992 until 2003 for 11 years at NYU and Lehigh. And now I've been in high school since 2003. So finishing up my 20th year on the high school side. So I've seen a lot. I've written lots of recommendations and read lots of essays and love being here at St. Andrews. So my wife works in the Dean of Studies, Student Life Office, and I have a daughter who's a junior, and I will let my daughter's college counselor introduce herself to you next.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Hastings. I'm in my 13th year at St. Andrews. In addition to working in the college office with Martha and Jason and with Cheryl Rojas, I teach a section of 10th grade English, and so know 14 of your students pretty well in that respect. I live on campus with my husband and our 2 kids who don't yet need a college counselor, but might need some support getting ready for kindergarten. So I'll hand it over to Martha.
Okay, I need to unmute myself. Hello, everyone. I'm Martha Pitts. I have a title, Assistant Director of College Counseling. This is my first year in college counseling, 2nd year at St. Andrews. I also teach English, and Ms. Hastings is also my daughter's counselor, college counselor. So I have a daughter who's a 5th former and a son who is a 3rd former. And I will popcorn it to Cheryl Rojas.
Hello, everybody. I am Cheryl Rojas. I am their administrative assistant, their office manager, their person that will find them if you need to get a hold of them person. Feel free to email me, call me anytime, and I am there to help you all.
So one of the things that we were wanting to talk with all of you about tonight is this idea of what should 4th formers be thinking about right now when it comes to, I guess, the college process. And quite honestly, we want them to be thinking about being 4th formers first and foremost. And that means from where we sit, finishing their course selection for their 5th form year and finishing their 4th form year itself in a great way. We met with them last Wednesday to talk a little bit about what junior year and senior year schedules might look like, and have met with several of them individually if they've had questions particular to their situation. So again, that's one thing that they should be thinking about. And actually those course selections are due Sunday night, so they should be nearly done with coming up with that plan. Like I said, finishing this sophomore year in a great way, whether that's, obviously in the classroom, but also with their extracurricular pursuits, and really just kind of capping off the year as best they can is a great thing for them to be thinking about. We also encourage them to be planning for a productive summer, and that can mean a lot of different things. For some kids, it means returning to camp for the last time. For other kids, it means having a summer job for the first time. And it doesn't have to be a fancy one. It can be being a camp counselor or scooping ice cream or, working for one of you if you're self-employed and you need somebody to do filing or grunt work. They also might want to volunteer, or maybe they want to take a class. Regardless, again, we sort of just really encourage them to be doing things, not to just be kind of hanging out, eating chips and watching Netflix. We encourage them to read. There are lots of readers at St. Andrews. It's one of my favorite things about being here as an English teacher, but it's great for kind of keeping their minds active and agile and having a great junior year. And also, we'll talk a little bit about testing down the road, but certainly everybody knows that people who read often do better on tests, those standardized tests like the SAT or the ACT. And then maybe it makes sense if you are doing any kind of travel, or if you have the time and the inclination, maybe do a casual college visit or two. You know, it certainly can be really smart if you live close to a college, even if it's one that your child thinks they might not be that interested in for whatever reason, taking a tour and figuring out, is it, you know, do they like the idea of a small campus or a big one? Is a big state school appealing to them? Is a school in a city appealing? And again, doing that casually, whether it's just walking around yourselves and not taking an official tour or stopping somewhere on your way to somewhere else, that can be kind of a worthwhile endeavor. And again, we recommend that in a very casual way, not in a formal, very planned out way. And again, just as a way to introduce them to what a college is like if they don't know, and also what kind of college might be interesting to them in some capacity.
Yeah, and I want to add something too about that. Like another way to introduce your teen to college is by taking in an event, like a visual performance at a college or an art show. There's not going to be a lot of sports events happening, but maybe that's something to do during a long weekend in the fall.
And one more thing I would add to this slide is we get inundated with emails and advertisements for summer college programs. They call them pre-college programs, and they're on every campus: Columbia, Brown, Georgetown, Penn, etc. They all offer these summer programs, and in themselves, they're not bad, but they're very expensive. And we think they're very, geared more toward marketing and making lots of money for the colleges over the summer. We don't necessarily see those as benefits in terms of getting into college. I mean, they can be they could be good, interesting programs if a student has something they're interested in, but we do caution that those are very expensive and maybe not always sometimes folks think that they lead to giving a student advantage at a particular college, and that's not what we've seen in our work. So.
All right, so I'll read you the general timeline for next fall. So in early September, all fifth formers will meet with the office, so the people that are on this panel right now, for a general introduction to college counseling. So we'll do a spiel that's very similar to what we're doing in this webinar for parents to your teens. Then from throughout September and October, we'll have college reps from a variety of universities and colleges in the United States who will come to St. Andrews. And so all fifth formers and sixth form students are invited to attend these information sessions. Fifth form students are required, that's why required is in bold, to attend 2 information sessions. Our wonderful admin assistant, Cheryl Rojas, assigns the colleges to the students, and it's a fairly, I don't want to say random, but I think it's kind of a random process on how we assign students to these colleges. And students are sometimes surprised by attending a college that they're assigned to, that they're not really thinking about or don't know much about, but they come away from the session having learned about this college and is possibly interested in. But that's not the goal, it's just to expose them to what's out there. So in October, all fifth formers take the PSATs at St. Andrews, and I believe Jason or Anna will speak more about that. Mid to late November, all fifth formers meet with the college counseling office for a more formal introduction to the college process. They're assigned a college counselor, so one of us. They register and SCORE and complete a college counseling survey. And we'll talk a little bit about SCORE, I believe, in this webinar a little bit later. After Thanksgiving break, we have individual meetings beginning, and they continue into January. And typically we add, well, I guess that starts in the next year. Sorry. All right. So December, all fifth formers take the SAT and or ACT. And this is the final time that the SAT will be on paper. Again, either Jason or Anna will speak more about the digital version that'll be coming out. And both tests are available at St. Andrews.
Okay, so we know testing is sort of always a often stressful, hot topic for students as they approach this process. And one of the few maybe benefits of the COVID pandemic was so many schools shifted to test optional. And in all honesty, we were a little skeptical. We just thought maybe, they were saying that, but did they really mean it? And in fact, they really do mean it. And so it's been a real benefit for our students, for students who maybe don't test as well, but are excellent students. We've been able to see those students go test optional at the most highly selective schools in the country and get good results. So we do think that that is truly an option for some students who are not particularly great at standardized tests. However, our philosophy is that every student should go through, we're going to have every student take the PSAT in the fall. We also will offer a mock ACT in the fall for the juniors. And we do recommend that students either, try one of those two tests in December or sometime in the winter of their junior year, just to see where they are, right? And at that point, they'll be meeting with us individually, and we can advise them, hey, does it make sense now to move forward? Should we take more testing? What schools are we looking at? And we'll have a plan moving forward from that after that first test. So that's generally our recommendation for all students. I should throw out the caveat that every student's different, and whatever plan we say is the general plan can be adjusted depending on the student. So in terms of ACT, SAT, again, we encourage students, some students to try both in December, the junior year, or take the mock test with us in the fall, and maybe to decide they prefer the ACT. And obviously, this is the first time that the SAT will be offered in a digital format, which our sense is it's not going to look that or be that different from the current test. It's just they'll be in a room with their computer instead of paper, and they'll be, taking the test on their computer as opposed to the paper version. You can't take it at home or in your bedroom. You still have to be, monitored. And so we're waiting to see and what that actually looks like. And we'll probably ourselves be on some mock digital PSATs this summer to take a look at it. And then of course, in next March of 2024 is when the SAT will officially be digital. The ACT, however, is staying in their same format, the paper format. So that will not be changing. So the other question we get a lot with SATs and ACTs is, what about test prep? And again, we'll say this is the general recommendation that we have for kids is, take the test next fall, and then let's sit down and make a plan. Does test prep make sense during the school year? Does it make more sense to do it in the summer after the junior year? It really depends on the student. For some students, adding test prep onto their current course load would be a lot and very stressful and not ideal. Some students can manage it, and we've seen both. We've seen some students who do test prep and are completely fine in managing their course load and being successful here. For other students, it would just be overwhelming. So for those students, we recommend a summer after the junior year test prep plan. Now, occasionally we do have some fourth formers who are, kind of high flyers. They took the PSAT in the 10th grade. They did quite well. And they're sort of raring to go. And we do have a handful of students who will do some test prep this coming summer. Again, that's a conversation we'd be happy to have with you. If you have questions about that, should that be for my student or not, we'd be happy to talk to you about that anytime throughout this spring. And again, we generally see a small handful of students do that. And these are definitely students who, maybe when they took the SSAT at St. Andrews, they knocked it out of the park, and they're really good at these standardized tests. For some of those students, maybe taking some prep in the summer could be useful. So we're always here and available throughout the year to answer questions. So if any questions about testing come up, please, don't hesitate to ask us. You certainly can ask some questions on this webinar also. The other thing I thought we'd talk a little bit about is just sort of the college admissions landscape. I mean, again, being old as I am and having started this in 1992, I often like to tell people about my first year at admissions at NYU. It was 1992, and we had a big celebration in the office when it was announced that NYU had just hit 20,000 applications, which was double what they had received in 1988. So they were 10,000 in 1988, 20,000 in 1992, and everyone was, congratulating themselves and patting themselves on the back, saying, "Wow, what a great job we've done here." And here we are 30 years later, and this past year, NYU received 120,000 applications. And the school hasn't grown. So it's still 16,000 undergrad, 4,000 in a freshman class. So we've seen this incredible shift in the landscape of colleges for a variety of reasons, which I don't want to go into too much detail, but happy to chat with you, any of you, about it at some point. But the bottom line is what we've seen is a real a stratification in the landscape, is that the colleges that are sort of the most popular, the most well-known, have seen significant increases in the number of applications, which has created, more competition, especially at the most selective schools. However, I think one of our strengths at St. Andrews is being as small as we are as a school and being 100% boarding, and having three of us, and if you count Cheryl as well as our, as the engine room in our office, like, we are really able, one, to get to know the students really well. And I think that's important as we guide them, advise them, and help them. And then two, knowing the students well, we also have the ability to know the colleges well and really try to help students build lists and help them find good fits for them as they go through this process. So, and the last thing I'd say is that we love these students, right? I mean, that sounds a little corny, but I do think that the three of us really genuinely enjoy working with the students. We think they're amazing. And then the last thing I would say is we also collaborate very closely, and not just in our Zoom meetings, but also in general. We work together. We share each other's, as students give us essays, we share them. We talk about lists together. So it's a very collaborative office that's hands-on and is really supportive of our students. So we feel, even though this college landscape has changed dramatically and things have gotten way more selective than they used to be, especially at this very small group of schools, relatively small group of schools, that a lot of our students quite honestly do look at and apply to. But we feel like we're here to really provide a great service for students and families and help guide them through this process. And, things are always changing, from the SAT being test optional to digital to, common apps to different kinds of applications. But, we're on top of it. We're out there. We visit colleges frequently and attend conferences and are stay on top of our profession. So that was a little long-winded, but so I'll stop there and pass it on to Anna.
I just want to interject one other thing about testing. There's that note about APs. What are they? Who needs them? And as most of you probably know at this point, St. Andrews is not an AP school. AP tests are the College Board's tests that are meant to, originally they were to help students kind of earn college credit in high school. And so they're still out there and they still can function that way. We are not an AP school. We don't follow an AP curriculum. We still provide AP tests if students would like to take them here. Typically the classes here that most align with an AP test are most advanced science, math, and language courses, which most kids are not hitting until the senior year, though occasionally they are in the junior year. Some students like to self-study for advanced placement tests. To Jason's point about balancing test prep with classes. I always say to students, it matters far more what your grade is in English than the score you got on the English AP. So your time should go towards your coursework as opposed to towards AP testing. The one thing that is good for parents to know, especially if you might be thinking, or your student might be thinking about wanting to study in England or Scotland or mainland Europe, is that AP tests then are perhaps not as optional as they are for other kids. And it's good to think about that. It's hard to plan a couple of years out, but APs are only offered once a year and they are offered in May. So if a student is possibly wanting to pursue some of those institutions, then they may want to think about, could I self-study, or does my coursework align at all with a possible AP test so that I could apply to those schools. A place like Oxford or Cambridge, for example, is going to want at least 3 tests in order for a student to even be eligible for consideration. And so for a lot of St. Andrews students, and students nationally for that matter, who go to AP schools, it's hard to have that many, it's hard to take that many tests. It's hard to kind of qualify for them, but certainly it requires some advanced planning that's good to consider. Again, summer before junior year, fall of junior year, as opposed to waiting until, say, April of the junior year when it's too late. All right, so just a couple of things you might want to talk about as a family this summer. We can't say it enough. We just said it to the juniors 2 nights ago. We said it to their parents last spring, but talking about financial aid and how you're going to pay for college and doing that early, even if it feels awkward or uncomfortable, is really, really important. St. Andrews, as an independent institution, is not bound by federal guidelines in terms of providing financial aid to families, which means we tend to be notably more generous than colleges and universities are, which means that they will probably be expecting more from you than St. Andrews might. And so again, we really urge you to think as a family about what you're willing to pay, what you're able to pay. And then we provided a couple of websites here that can give you, that are sort of some quicker calculators to try to figure out what you might be asked to pay by the colleges. The FAFSA, which is the free federal form for student aid, is undergoing an overhaul that will happen. And so the student aid index calculator that's provided here is for the new FAFSA that the current juniors will be using. So your students will also be using it in 2 years' time or 1.5 years' time. But again, talking early and often about financial aid and what that might look like for your child is again pretty important, and it doing so and can really help us as we work with them starting next year. A couple other things that are good to kind of have on your radar if this might apply to your student: special interests, things like athletics. And I think our athletic director, Neil Cunningham, is going to meet with parents over Arts Weekend to talk about this. But if they are interested in pursuing sports at the college level, whether Division 1, 2, or 3, that's something that really probably should get moving this summer and in the fall. Art-specific programs, particularly ones that are conservatory-esque or art-specific schools like the Rhode Island School of Design. If your child might be interested in going that route, it's great to start learning about what they might need in order to apply. And then again, international schools, I mentioned AP tests. If that's something that you think you might want your child to pursue or they might want to pursue, it's good to kind of, again, start the research early to know what they might need. Along with potentially needing AP tests, many of them do require the SAT or ACT, and they do tend to be very clear about what their minimums are. And so it's good to know for your child if they might need to prep or get ready for that to meet those minimums. And then I think it's great to talk a little bit, not all the time, but a little bit about how your child might determine the kind of school that they're interested in. And again, starting close to home. I always use the example of if you live kind of in this area or not too far from Philadelphia, it's really easy to see a big state school like the University of Delaware, an urban school like Drexel or UPenn, and then a smaller liberal arts college like Haverford or Swarthmore without having to go too far. And kind of doing some of that exploration, or Martha's suggestion about going to an event on a college campus can be a great way to get your kid thinking about what matters to them and what kind of place they might want to be in.
So we want to open up to questions, and again, we hope that you get a sense here at St. Andrews. Obviously, we work in cycles, so like the fall is really focused on our seniors and helping them fill out applications, while our spring is often shifting a little bit to the juniors, but we're always available for you as well. So if questions arise this spring or summer, you can always reach out to us as questions come up. We're happy to help. And again, you won't get an official person yet, but all 3 of us are always willing to help out. So and yeah, I wanted to see if there are any questions. We promised we'd be done in like 30 minutes. We're under the wire. So are there other questions that folks have and they want to post in the chat, I guess?
A good question about, do we know if the SAT will be super scored pre and after 2023? It's currently absolutely super scored. I haven't heard otherwise at this point. So for now, I'm going to say yes, it'll be super scored for the classes of 2024 and 2025.
Question is, are there any guides you recommend picking up, such as the FISC guide? I have to say, again, I love to read, and I have stacks of books next to my bedside, and one of them is the Princeton Review Guide to Colleges. So weirdly, I like to read that once, it's, nighttime reading for me. So yeah, I think FISC is a good one, Princeton Review. So if you're still old school and like books, I think those are the two I probably look at the most. Yeah.
There's a question about, I'll do the SAT, ACT question first, the difference between them. The SAT has sort of two sections. We sort of traditionally call it the verbal, which is like kind of English language and reading comprehension. And then there's the math. And it sort of flips back and forth between the two of them throughout the test. What students typically will say about the SAT is the questions are harder, but there are fewer of them. So it's a better test for someone who might work at a sort of a slightly slower pace. The ACT has four sections: English, which is sort of the grammar and the language piece; reading, which is reading comprehension; math, self-explanatory; and then science, which is actually sort of looking at charts and graphs and evaluating information. It is a fast test. Students will frequently, there are more questions and less time to complete it. So if you have a student who's a pretty quick worker, it can be a good test. It also, again, it doesn't sort of bounce between things as much as the SAT does. So some students like the fact that I'm going to do the math and then that's it and I'm done with it. But again, the speed tends to be one of the biggest differences for kids when they test with the two of them. Both tests do something called superscore, which is you can take your highest scores of the sections and combine. If you take the ACT 3 times, you can take your highest English score from one and highest math from another and highest science from another to create a new composite score. The SAT does the same thing. So they're pretty equivalent that way. Yeah.
Jump in, should we do?
Yeah.
I think the next question is there any limitations to the number of universities to be applied?
The short answer is no. We don't. So I know there are some boarding schools and some high schools that say will limit the number of applications a student can apply to. I mean, we generally advise 8 to 12 schools is sort of the typical number. Some students will do a little less. And we do have a few students that apply to more, but our experience has been that more is not always better. In fact, usually is not, because it takes a decent amount of time to do these applications well. And, some of the things that colleges do consider is something called demonstrated interest. And it's, which means, have you visited the campus? Have you done webinars? Have you responded to their emails? And so these schools are sort of tracking this data and they're determining the likelihood of this student enrolling. And so, if you apply to 24 schools, that's like a full-time job trying to show interest and doing a good job on applications. And so what we see is students really doing a lot of watered down applications, and the results sort of reflect that. So they end up not getting as many good results. And as adults, there's sometimes the attitude of like, well, just what's the harm? Just apply to as many schools as possible. You never know. But what we see is the child, getting lots and lots of no's and how that feels. And we always talk about, we want them to do the process well. And we think even if they have ultimately a good result that they like, but they heard no so many times, it doesn't feel like it was a good process. And so, we try to be mindful of balancing the practical but also being aware of the students' emotional needs and making sure, ultimately that they feel good about themselves in the process. And so the shotgun approach of applying to, 25, 30 schools, what we've seen over our history here is that it's not a good idea. So we really try to advise and guide students to focus more on, in that 10, 12 range is the sweet spot. So.
Actually, very practically, the common application, which is the most commonly used form of applying to schools in this country, maxes out at 20. So the students that we do run into who have applied to 25 or 27 usually have applied to, maybe 18 or 19 on the Common App, and then the UCs don't use it. So maybe it's those, and then possibly an international school or two. But very practically, the Common App maxes out at 20.
You want to take the next one?
Yeah, there's the question about, do many schools have early binding admissions starting in August after junior year? And binding admissions purely means if you are admitted, that's where you're going. The answer to that actually is no. Not many schools do. The one that is most commonly known in our circles anyway is Wake Forest. And they used to be that you could apply anytime after your junior year ended, and they would tell you in 6 weeks if you were in and then you were going. They have moved their start date up to August 1, but they still have it. But that's really the only one off the top of my head that I know about. That's binding.
They might be pushing that back even. Yeah.
Yeah.
Most early deadlines are in either mid-October or November. And those decisions come out in December. That's the most typical pattern for early binding programs. So next question is, does St. Andrews have better relationships with some colleges, universities over others, whether geographically East Coast, West Coast? And what I would say to that is, like, I don't know, there was a time, I think, in college admissions and college counseling in the 80s, or maybe even before that, where there was definitely more of a, boarding schools had sort of pipelines to certain schools. And I think that was more common back then, but that's really, I think, devolved quite a bit, or just doesn't exist anymore. What I would say is this to that question is, we have 50 to 75 colleges visit us every year. And that includes schools from the West Coast, including UC Berkeley, believe it or not, and UC Santa Barbara, as well as, a lot of the East Coast schools, the Ivy League, some of the Ivy League schools and schools in the South. So we really do have, the fact that those schools take the time to spend an evening with our students every fall, I think says a lot about what they think of our school and what they think of our students. And as I said, we also, part of our role is to, tell St. Andrew's story out there at these schools. So I was at Rice this past year, Wash U in St. Louis. Anna was down at Davidson, which is a school where we sent a lot of students. Martha's going to be up in upstate New York visiting Colgate and Hamilton and some schools up there. So we get out and sort of, our job is to share the St. Andrews story. So, I don't think that there's any special relationships per se, but I do think that St. Andrews is a well-known school, and our students do quite well in the process. I think where it maybe becomes less of an issue is if a student applies to a school where we traditionally just don't send a lot of applications. So I'll try to think of an example of one. Let's say great school, University of Washington in Seattle, right? Great public university, great location in Seattle. It's in a really cool neighborhood. We just don't have a lot of kids apply there. So we do have a few every year or every other year. And so I'm not sure how much they know St. Andrews or how much of a read we get there, although some of our students get in there. So, but I would say, generally speaking, our school is pretty well known across the country, especially at the schools where we've done a lot of students have sent a lot of applications. How are we doing on time? We've
got 5 minutes left before our free webinar grouping concludes. So we'll try to get through a couple of these pretty quickly. PSAT scores, any bearing on a student's visibility to colleges? No, not really. If a student checks the box when they fill out their registration form for the PSAT that says, give my info to colleges, they will get a lot of communication, but it's not necessarily from where they want to go, or places they may have ever heard of. It'll get them a lot of emails and potentially a lot of junk mail. So no, the PSAT doesn't have a lot of bearing on that. There are two questions about students who might not know what they want to major in. And I always say to students, that's fine. That's really okay. Occasionally students will need to figure out, do they want sort of a liberal arts major or a more, or are they thinking engineering, in which case then they have to possibly at some schools know which division to apply into, but particularly not knowing at this point in high school is really great. Actually, they have plenty of time to figure that out. And we talk about it a lot. And most colleges are pretty flexible. There are certainly exceptions to that, and certain majors that you really need to start right off the bat, like nursing. But for the most part, it's okay to not know and to not know right now. Early decision, how it's working these days. The short answer is it depends on the institution, but there are several, among them some very highly selective places like Tufts and WashU and Middlebury, where they are admitting a substantial portion of their class through early decision and early decision 2. That's the binding program. And what that means is that regular decision has gotten really hard at those institutions. So does early decision make a big difference at some of those schools? Yes. Colby College in Maine, 40% admit rate in ED and ED2, 6% in regular. That's pretty obvious as to where the advantage is. So that is going on. We're hoping with COVID stuff effects dissipating that might shift a bit, but you know, we'll see what that looks like.
But full disclosure, a lot of our students will apply in the early rounds. And so, you know, it's not, students rightfully see that as a potential bump in their chances at particular schools. And so it is not uncommon for our students to pursue that. And we think, you know, they meet with us throughout this junior year, we get to know them, and, you know, a good number of them are ready to make that decision. So we certainly are open to that. And in some cases, if a student says that Colby is their first choice, we would say, look at this data. It probably makes a lot of sense for you to consider early decision at Colby or Tufts or WashU or a number of others. So that is something we are very aware of from our perspective. Do you support students in preparing to write and reviewing their application essays, and what is the process? So yes, we do. Unfortunately, we have two incredible English teachers on our staff, Anna and Martha. So you know, again, I think that's a real advantage of our team. And while I'm not an English teacher, I've read many thousands of essays throughout my career. So between the three of us, we offer a lot of support. We ask every student to submit a draft of their essay to us. We give feedback. We share essays with each other. Many of our English teachers, other English teachers who are not in the college office, will also read essays for students. So I will say, I think I'm very confident in saying that our students get a tremendous amount of support in doing their applications, filling out their essays, choosing their teachers for recommendations. We are very, you know, we're small, and we're here to help really support the students in all their endeavors and filling out those applications. So that I say very confidently.
All right, last one that we'll cover, and then so before we get cut off, and that's, do we offer test prep or should families pursue that independently? We are in off and on with this right now. We are not offering any test prep, so independent pursuit is probably your best bet. We are happy to tell you some organizations, if you want to reach out, that kids have worked with here that have been successful and supportive. But we do tend to find these days, with everything being available virtually, most students and families are going out on their own instead of using resources that we have historically offered.
Well, thank you guys so much. We appreciate you joining us this evening. Again, we're here for you guys. If you have questions, if you're on campus and you want to pop down, we're in the lower level of the Founders Hall, and we look forward to meeting you in person, seeing you in person, and starting this process with your children next fall.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Oh.
Did you hit end?
Still going?